Leeds United are set to face off against Norwich City in the second leg of the EFL Championship playoffs at Elland Road tomorrow. And let's be honest, the Whites need a result. If we go to the playoffs and it comes out as penalties, I can imagine everyone simultaneously pooing themselves. Not a good thing to do, and that means we need to get the tactics right, and in order to get the tactics right, you need the right people on the pitch, and you need a perfect lineup. So, in this video, we are going to talk about what Leeds United's best lineup is for this situation, and I'm recording this live, so I have a little bit of chat assistance, and I've had a little bit of chat assistance in the build-up. If you see me live, hop along, be massively appreciated, and subscribe whilst you're at it. Cheers. Diving into it, first thing that we need to talk about is the formation, because the formation changed a little bit, sort of, in the first leg against Norwich. Now, there's a little bit of conversation of if it was still a 4-2-3-1, but I think relatively we packed the midfield out a little bit. Archie Gray, whilst he did play as a 10, still had more of a capacity to drop all the way deeper, which, brilliant, fantastic, meant that we had more people in midfield. But there is still a conversation around whether or not that causes us a little bit of a problem up top. If you only have Georgie at the top, and it's a little bit harder to create chances for people because Georgie is your chance creator and you're relying on the midfielder going past or the wingers doing their thing and not just getting ground down a little bit. So, do we go a little bit more aggressive? Do we go back to the 4-2-3-1? And in my opinion, that's what we will land at. We will go to a 4-2-3-1. We will go back to the usual, which has worked for the most part this season. It worked twice against Norwich, so it might today. I feel like last week was a case of don't lose, which is completely fair enough. But now we're in a situation of we need to win the game of football, which I feel like we will. First choice in terms of the lineup itself needs to be the goalkeeper. And I think it's pretty common sense. As much as people don't like his distribution as of late, it still needs to be Illan Meslier. Because look at our options at the back. You've got Illan Meslier, who has played for an entire season. You have Carl Darlow, who played for 2-3 matches, maybe, and conceded a hell of a lot more per 90 than he should have. And you've got Christopher Classon, who people will say kept clean sheets. He's not conceded a single shot on target for Leeds, or he's conceded like 1 or 2. He's not been tested well enough. It needs to be Illan Meslier in goal, and defending him is where there's a little bit more of a conversation to be had. So at right back, I'm going to say my choice would be Connor Roberts. Purely because of that width, that directness that he brings. You could see when Dan James came on against Norwich in the first leg, we were a lot more direct and we had a lot more luck when we were going forwards. That's something that I feel like we should really be looking to replicate in this game. There is a little bit of a shout for Sam Byram, purely because he's defensively a little bit more solid, and you could see his insane work rate when it came down to dealing with their attacks, because occasionally you get caught up out of position, but he'd race back and deal with it. Brilliant. But at the same time, I still feel like Connor Roberts is the choice here, although I feel like the chat might have something to say about that in a moment. At centre-back, I'm going with Joe Rodon, of course. Absolute rock at the back with Ethan Ampadu. Works very effectively, that duo. They have been perfectly good throughout the season so far. Left back, I'm going with Junior Firpo. Whilst there has been a little bit of conversation about does he occasionally get caught out of position, I think he's just an attacking left back. That's what happens. It just makes a little bit of sense. Yes, the being caught out of position could be a problem, but that's where the midfield gets to cover. And that's why we have centre-backs, and it'll be fine, I think. Let's roll with it. It'll all be good. As the chat says, Senior Firpo. At the same time, we have Andy saying that if Leeds got a Pensbull, Farke, Meslier for Classon, I don't think that would be a good idea, purely because you get the issue of what happens when you sub on a striker for penalties. You get the Sancho and Rashford issue where they've not touched a ball for an entire game, they're not warm, and then suddenly you're relying on them, which would be daft, I think. That is just a speed-running way to, 1, kill the morale of your goalkeeper, and 2, have a completely raw player in that isn't necessarily going to be able to do the job. In front of the defence, you need to talk about the midfield. And the midfield is where you have a lot of big questions to discuss, because we've got a lot of good midfielders. And if I'm not starting Archie Gray, does he go into the midfield? What is Gray's role? In this instance, it gets a little bit complicated. It gets very complicated. You get into the place of, as much as I love Archie, I don't think he's the best player for this midfield, because what we need to do is we need to be retaining possession throughout the game. We need to be in a position where we're keeping the ball and able to create threats with it. And I think Glenn Kamara is the better option for that. I think Glenn Kamara is better at receiving the ball, taking a moment and finding a pass that makes sense, whereas Archie is more direct, a little bit more box-to-boxy. And whilst I did say I like the directness from Connor Roberts, it's a little bit different when you come to the midfielders, because the midfielders are where you control the game and you don't want to give away control. And for the same reason, I've gone with Ilya Gruev, because Ilya Gruev is that defensive midfielder, and whilst he's not necessarily been on the best of form, he can still do that job. He can still throw in a tactical foul from time to time, because sometimes that's what you need. He's someone that is like that staunch, kicky presence in the midfield, and in a playoff match that could get very, very tough, I feel like Ilya Gruev is the perfect choice. To me, it makes sense. Someone's made a very, very good point in the comments on Archie's role in this side. Gray off the bench in the 10 if Ruter is off it. That works fine. Gray in the 10 works perfectly well in the first leg. It could work perfectly well in the second leg. So maybe we give that a go. Who knows? Going on a little bit further on, we need to talk about the attacking unit. In this case, I'm talking about your attacking midfielders, because we will get to that whole number 9 conversation in a couple of minutes. And obviously, you need to start with Crescencio Somerville. That just makes sense. Now, you got a little bit of a discussion over the number 10. Cree is in there because he can just do a little bit of devastation from time to time. He can get a ball and just make chaos happen, which is really nice. Very fun. And that's where the 10 discussion comes in, because I feel like that's the same sort of player that Jorginho Ruter is. I feel like Georgie is also the kind of guy that can just, at any point in a game, receive the ball and create a stunning chance. And that hasn't necessarily happened recently, but it's also not happened for Cree. So it's a little bit of a conversation that needs to be had. I feel like, and I did a little bit of a poll here in the chat, where the discussion was between Georgie and Nonto. And there was a little bit of Piru, but one person voted for Piru, so that's not the chat. In this instance, the chat basically voted for Ruter over Nonto. And I think I agree. Because Willie is good. Willie is a very dribbly boy. However, I think we've not seen enough of him in the 10 to say that he would be able to do that specific job in this specific game. So I'd be a little bit of an optimist and say that Jorginho is probably the choice. In addition to that, on the wing, we have another conversation to be had between Willie and Dan James. In this specific instance, I think I'd go with Dan James. Just because when he came on against Norwich in that most recent game, his directness was an immediate threat. He was the reason that I've put Connor Roberts in the side, and he's also an incredible shithouse. And we saw what happened when there's a little bit of shithousery down Willie Nonto's flank in the most recent match. And what happens when there's shithousery down his flank is he gets booked. Whereas whereas Dan James gets annoying to the other team, which is brilliant. That's what you need in a playoff final. You need someone that can do that, someone that can get on their nerves. So I think Dan James is the perfect option there. And this is a fair point, though. Colin thinks that Farke will start Nonto. I also think the same, but I think that more from a fitness perspective. I've said Dan James because I personally believe that Dan James is the better option. I did note how late he came on in the first leg. Jan James, indeed. I noted how late he came on in the first leg, which tells me that he might not be 100% yet. And that tells me that Farke might not risk it. But on the subject of risking things, we need to talk about the number 9 conversation. And I believe in this instance there is a better option and there is a more likely option. The better option, voted for by the chat, I will just find the specific numbers. 81% of the chat were of the opinion that Matteo Joseph should be starting in the number 9. And I agree. I think Matteo Joseph is comfortably the better option because he's just more of a 9. He plays in those more advanced positions. He has far closer shots than Joel Piroux does. There's a stat on FBref that is the average distance of a shot. And if I remember right, Piroux's is something like 16 yards or something like that. Joseph's is 7. He's far closer when he's taking shots, and that is absolutely what we need to happen. But at the same time, I did a poll asking who do you think Farke picks as the 9, and the more likely option looked like Joel Piroux. Just because, as I've been saying for a while, it'll be the not wanting to put such a young player under so much pressure issue. Which I understand, but it doesn't make me hyper confident. But with all that in mind, what do you think? Let me know in the comments below what you think, because goddamn, we will have to find out. Subscribe if you're not yet. Like the video if you enjoyed. Like the stream if you're still currently here. And I'll keep the video going for another couple of minutes whilst I go through a couple of little comments and chats. And then we'll go into the second recording of the session. This is what you're missing if you're watching on YouTube after the fact. And we'll dive into that. First question is, did you get your Leeds ticket then? I did indeed. The issue is, when it comes to getting trains, it's going to be an absolute nightmare. So train there is, I'm arriving at something like 4 p.m. My brother's picking me up after work, and we're basically heading straight down to Elland Road because we both like being there fairly early. And then afterwards, I'm getting a train back at something like 8 a.m. So that's going to be fun. That's going to be an adventure because I've got a work shift to deal with on Friday, which isn't great. Joseph 9, Piroux 10, whichever is worst after 60, if not winning, comes off for Ruter, who plays in the 10. Kind of makes sense. Kind of like it. Yeah. That works. It was a harsh booking on Willie. Should have had a free kick for penalty shout. Was okay. Willie gives him a shove, but he dives, books Willie for a clap. Willie was easily the best of the front four. That's true. But no matter what happens, if you sarcastically applaud a referee, you're going to get booked. It doesn't matter what's happened before. You're not changing their mind. All you do with that sarcastic round of applause is get yourself in trouble. Which is kind of on you. I've driven you, to be honest, just enough. I completely blanked on that. I'll be completely straight. And I basically booked the train tickets yesterday. And I'm a Yorkshireman. And I don't like wasting money. But at some point in the future. The ref sarcastically clapped back, which, to be honest, was funny. I don't know if that was a sarcastic clapback more than it was going, yeah, that's why I booked you. If that all makes sense. But yeah, if you're on the YouTube video, it's probably going to cut off now. So, hope you enjoyed.